Hey, good morning. Wait, is it afternoon for you, Kim? I was gonna say good morning, Kim.
It is afternoon, though the sun didn't come out today. So,
Oh
whatever.
no! Oh my gosh. Oh well. Yeah. Then I'll feel badly to tell you that it's always sunny here, but that
Look,
is
that's where
that.
you live.
Yeah.
You made a good
That.
decision.
Yeah. And it's a big reason why I'm here. So right. All right, folks. So we have Kim Wensel here. She is a really dynamic businesswoman with, I think on her website, you said that you've done everything, right? You've switched up your career multiple times, you pivoted. And in some ways, I read it as you're somebody who, you're an example of you can figure things out. Like, not everything has to be permanent because I think we also get stuck in this idea of like, oh, I got to be in this job, I got to be in this industry. Now, we make our identity part of it. And I love your story because I think you show other women that you can evolve, you can transform, you can do what it takes to, kind of chase what's next for you. And now you also have founded a women's community called The Bench. So
Yes.
tell us a little more about The Bench, and anything else I missed in your background. I'm sure I did missed a lot, but I kind of pointed out the thing that I really like because, I'm somebody who moved around. So I'm like, yeah, that's the thing I'm paying attention to.
Yeah. And there are so many directions I could go with like introducing who I am and where I've been, but I
Yeah.
love kind of grounding in what you see
Yeah, yeah.
because when you're in it, you don't, I mean, the, for me, when I hear other people who are like, yeah, you've had the courage to try the next thing and
Mhm.
bop around, that's actually always been my biggest insecurity. And
Really?
so, oh, yeah. I mean, I wanted that linear path. I'm someone who craves stability. I don't
Mm.
consider myself to have like a high tolerance for risk. I've made a lot of decisions in my life out of fear.
Mhm.
So I think it's just a good example too of like you know yourself really well.
Yeah.
And so to hear someone else be like, it's a great example of you're not locked in. I'm like, yes. And I fought against the
Yeah.
fact that I wasn't locked in for so long. But at 40, coming to terms with, okay, like maybe there's actually something to this.
Yeah.
So, yes, I do sort of lead with all of the different hats I've worn, all of the titles that I've collected along the way. And with all of that, within the last year, Wendy, I'm going to be really honest
Mm.
because this was not something that I just accepted overnight. It really took a year of kind
Yeah.
of stepping away, some massive personal life changes, and basically for the first time saying, okay, I'm just going to trust that if I
Mhm.
do this thing that's pulling on my heart and pulling on my intuition, it's going to work out. Every move
Yeah.
before that was very calculated.
You
So
know,
that's
what's
where I landed.
Yeah, well, what's interesting to me when I hear your side of it is you said, you don't have a high tolerance for risk, you crave stability, and that's how I lived my entire life. And yet, when you look at where I've been, what I've done, you were like, "Are you sure that that's who you are?" Like, I've always told myself this, and this is funny, and maybe this is a good case study for like the story you tell yourself about yourself versus how you actually show up in the world. I mean, if you think about it, like, I've always told myself, "Oh, I'm very low risk. I want the stable thing." But I've traveled like across the world
Literally.
looking for that, which if you think about it, is like that does not make sense. Like, why would you take a risk so that you would I guess in my mind, I took a risk so that the opportunity would give me the ability to have low risk. Maybe that's what it was. Um, but yeah, and I've just been taking risk after risk. I mean, at every career turn, at every major decision, and even like, especially leaving the corporate world. When people ask me, like, what really made me go, like, this is it, I'm like, you would not believe how long it actually took me. Because if I had to be super honest, I probably would have never actually wanted to start in the corporate world if I had always been honest with myself and been brave enough to have that self reflection. So, yeah, is
Oh,
that,
absolutely. Well,
yeah.
and I think what is interesting about knowing your own story a little bit too is people probably look at you now as somebody super confident and brave and owning her voice. And, because people say similar things to me, I'm like, had you known what was
Mhm.
going through my head, had you known all the stories I
Yeah,
was telling
yeah,
about myself, 4 years. By the way, 7 years for me of starting a family, starting a business, side hustling, working a nine
Mm-hmm.
to five, still telling myself, I'm going to find that dream job. Like that dream job is finally going to,
Yeah.
it's going to come. Right. And
Yeah.
then moving jobs, not happening. Trying
Mm-hmm.
something else, convincing myself that I'm closer and closer until finally it was like, you're meant to be an entrepreneur. Accept this
Yeah.
about yourself.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, if you think about it, the fact that we do hop around or did hop around really was a sign that we have the entrepreneur spirit.
Yeah.
And I'm going to digress on this and then pull us back into the topic of the day. Um, I'm forgetting at my point actually, because there's the other point about that we were talking about today. So, folks, you probably see the title. It's called "Am I Still the Bitch?" And Kim and I had a conversation about it because when you first think about it, you're like this is just so in your face. And just for the record,
And
I'll
by the
probably
way, I was like, you could tell there's like past trauma there with that word. I'm like, are you sure that you want me to call myself a bitch?
and I actually, I wrestled with that name for a long time. And just folks, just so you know, I'm going to shorten the word bitch to just B for the rest of the episode because otherwise that's just going to be all over the episode. And after a while that gets tiring. It's like watching a Samuel L. Jackson movie. It's like after a while you're just tired of the F's, right? Uh, but like I remember in grad school, I had a friend who lovingly would call her friends bitches or whatever. And I used to be so offended. And she didn't understand why. She was like, why does this offend you? Like, this is just like, it's for fun. It's just, and at the time I was very locked in with this idea that that is just internalized misogyny, because that's a word that's used as a slur for women and for women to adopt and say, oh, now we're owning it and therefore it's empowering. I was like, I'm calling bullshit on that. And then when you go into the corporate space, now the B word has a completely different meaning. And I found out after being at work that it wasn't just about um, calling someone who was unpleasant or just hard to work with or just not a nice person. But it really was being thrown around a lot more loosely, and it's not like I heard it from colleagues or leaders that they would tell me that to my face. But there was always that sense of like, oh, if you stand up too much for yourself, if you are too vocal about this, you're going to be labeled as that woman in that department who's really hard to work with. And then people can then read the subtext and go like, oh, she's a B then, and sometimes, sure, it's justified, right? We've all worked for horrible people who also happen to be women. And then sometimes it's just because you have strong boundaries or you have strong standards and you want to hold firm to that. And you believe that's part of how you should show up as a leader. So uh, before I get too far into it, yeah, Kim, like tell me like what's been your experience with that work? Because you said like there's been some trauma around that for you. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think the thing that's really important that you just said is that for me, it was not necessarily experiencing someone calling me that to my face. It
Mm-hmm.
was that messaging under the surface that
Right.
followed those labels of like to
Right.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so from a very early age, I knew not to go all like my childhood trauma, but from a very early age, I knew that I was too much for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I matured early. I
Mm-hmm.
stood out. And I did not see any adults around me interrupting those narratives, which, by the way, were mostly from other girls.
Yeah.
And so, you mentioned at the top of the episode, now run a community for women. I was never a girl's girl. I still have a
Hmm.
hard time calling myself a girl's girl because I think that so much of what that culture is
Yeah.
like the in crowd. And there
Mm.
was always something about me that I knew that I was different and I was a
Yeah.
little bit misunderstood and I was a little bit grittier. And every time for pretty much, I would say from like 13 to 35, that I would stand up, I would like follow that voice inside of me being like, no,
Mhm.
this is wrong. No, you should ask for more. No, you should, like, this is, you're treating other people with respect. You're holding yourself in integrity and accountability. You deserve that from other people too. Every
Mhm.
time I would push a little bit on that, that sense of like, oh, she's such a bee. She's
Yeah.
too much. We can't
Yeah.
handle her. She's asking for the world. And so this
Yeah.
constant messaging that you're receiving
Mhm.
about what it means about me to be myself is wrong.
Yeah.
And that's a heavy weight to carry.
That is. And, there's so much to actually unpack around the phenomenon of the B word being a slur and now it's been taken back. And there's so much like pop culture, there's so much stuff around it. But I wanted it to explore more specifically, like on a professional level, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're in the corporate space, that B word means something very different, right? Like I've seen again in the corporate space, slowly some people are starting to own that, like, oh, I'm the boss bitch, right? Like, and then like it feels fun to say, like, oh, you're owning it. It's like it's kind of cute, but like when you really think about it, take a step back and think about it, like, what does that actually mean? To me, the subtext is, uh, if you're if you're a powerful woman, or you're a woman who wants to exercise her power, which doesn't mean control and dominance, but just exercise her power, that you will be called that, right? Yeah, you're being boss or bossy or you're acting like a boss, but it's qualified by your boss bitch. So, uh, and you and I had this like conversation around just the social perception and the research around how people view women as leaders and how we so easily get called that. So that I can see how some women in the corporate space or even in business have just completely embraced it. They said, it's almost like if you can't fight them, join them, right? Like if that's what you're going to call me, like I'm just not going to change my behavior for you. So therefore, sure, I'll embrace that label, and then there's the other half that I see who don't really talk in those terms. So they don't even try to like get close to that. What's your take on this? Because to me, it's still a little bit problematic.
Sure. And I think it's so dependent on the context and work culture that surrounds you, right? Because you
Sure.
can be
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm the boss bee, whatever. But what
Yeah.
I often see, women who feel like they can say that, they've had to create their own things in order to own it.
Mhm.
Because being able to succeed in most of our corporate structures, and I
Yeah.
say corporate, like I was in nonprofit, I was in agencies, they're corporate, right? Like
Mhm.
they're all built on this foundation of pretty much white male led organizations, very masculine
Mhm.
leadership tendencies. And so, sure, I think that some of those, let's take some startups, for example, like they reward that grittiness, that sort of like interruption of patterns, whatever, because they have to. But that I don't think is the norm. I think often if you are going to lead as a woman in integrity with what you believe, you are, like you said, you do have to decide, okay, well, I'm just going to have to like take this as a side effect. Somebody's going to label me as this and whatever.
Mhm.
But what happens when that starts to then intimidate the very people who are in power around you or above you?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's great to be like, okay, whatever. I don't care what people think about me. I'm going to be me. But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, where you're in these very complex power situations where you start to then intimidate someone who doesn't like that, or they feel singled out, or they feel intimidated by you, that's
Mhm.
when I think the blowback starts to happen because
Right.
nobody cares and nobody's really going to. I mean, I guess they could label you as, like, oh, she's such a bitch, whatever.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter until their ego starts to feel
Mm.
threatened, right? So it's like you can go off and do your thing as long as it doesn't threaten me. And that's, I
Yeah.
think, also, Wendy, where we get caught up as women because there's been historically, I think it's changing, but
Mhm.
historically, this scarcity mindset of like,
Oh, yeah.
I don't see myself represented at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm going to get there, I guess I have to play the game, but there's only room for one of us. And so I can't model something different and bring others along with me
Mm-hmm.
because like I'm going to work hard and I'm going to put myself at stake. And if I have to change who I am, that's all I have energy for anymore. Right.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's a lot of output.
It is. And, I used to, because I've worked for queen bees, right? And I learned that term back in grad school in one of my classes, actually. What's interesting is which is the effect that you talked about, right? Like it took me so much work to claw all the way up in the boys club. And now that I'm here, I am not letting any other woman try to take this from me or show up in a way that discredits me by association of our gender. And then
Oh,
we also see this effect among people of color. I've heard this said about this experiences from Asian people and the Black community as well. Is that sometimes when they see folks like them in leadership, oftentimes you would think they would try to lift people up, but they don't. They're actually harsher to their own groups because they're thinking whatever it is you're doing, you're giving all of us a bad name. And I only got here because I had to really assimilate.
can I share a story about
Yeah.
that really quick?
Yeah,
Okay. So
please.
this is fascinating. And
Mm,
like, this isn't even political. It's just,
no. Yes.
take all the politics aside if you're listening and just listen to kind of like this
Yeah.
personal anecdote. So I'm in a Uber on the way to the airport. I'm going to Morocco and my Uber
Ooh,
driver
fun.
was from, yeah, I wish I was doing that today.
Yeah.
Um, my Uber driver was from Libya.
Hmm.
And he is talking about how like his dad worked so hard to bring them over. And he starts talking about how like immigrants are ruining our country, as in America. And how I was talking about how I just moved and
Hmm.
it was very, very white, very kind of
Yeah.
conservative, just different than what DC is
Yeah.
like, which is where I'm from. And he's like, "Oh, I would love to live there." And it was just such an interesting, almost like out of body experience because on one hand, he's
Mm,
talking very lovingly about his immigrant experience. And
right.
on the other hand, he's saying, "But I'm the only one that did it right. So I don't think that we should have," he literally said, "I don't think we should have any more immigrants to the United States." And it was such a strange thing to hear from the outside because you're like, "But buddy,
I
you are an immigrant."
yeah. Actually, I can relate to that pretty personally. Because I've seen people around me do that. So my family and I, we grew up as immigrants in Hungary. So very different context from being immigrants here in the US. And I would have to say that for the large part of my youth and young adulthood, I did resent a lot of my fellow Chinese immigrants. And a lot of it is due to internalized racism, right? Because my parents really wanted us to fit in, wanted us to assimilate. So, which meant you got to adopt the behaviors of what's around you, what's acceptable, which then meant that if other Chinese immigrants, especially, if they're new and they're not displaying those behaviors, but they're displaying contrary behaviors that maybe aren't seen as, um, I don't know, just not culturally, dominant or acceptable, then then I would just feel embarrassed. I'm like, why would you do this? Like, why are you being embarrassing? Right. And not understanding that, like there's nothing inherently objectively embarrassing. It's embarrassing because it's in context of what you think other people might say. And so I actually feel that a lot. And I know folks, we started about women
No,
and
it's the
yeah,
same
yeah,
exact
but it's
thing though
this,
for
but it's saying,
women.
yeah. And
Because you're like so hyper aware of how you might come off. And you're
yes.
so hyper aware of like towing that line of acceptability because you
Hmm.
know what it takes to have to get to where you want to go. And in some
Yeah.
cases, you're like, I'm just going to do it. And so I actually think there's huge parallels here because the risk is if you decide to just kind of go on your own individuality and say, I'm me and I'm going to let my strength, skills, experience back me up. The truth is, sometimes that's not enough.
Yeah. And also and then we do see evidence of the larger group getting punished because somebody from that group maybe didn't necessarily do something that represented them well, even though it's so unfair to have one person represent a whole group, right? And it kind of
Completely.
reminds me of, this is kind of related to women in leadership, that throughout Chinese history, like we've had the imperial system for a very long time, and we've only had one female empress ever throughout in our history. I forget the time, but it was, during long ago time, and she ruled with an iron fist and was pretty ruthless. And there was a lot of backlash on her type of leadership, her type, her violence, and because of her, there was they made it. Uh, they banned basically the not banned, but they didn't allow female, empresses anymore. My video just went out. Hold on a second.
Same.
Yeah. Hey, Ricky, I don't know if you can hear me, but my video went out.
Got you.
Okay, cool. Is it just timing out or? Okay. 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 That's all right. Great thing about this is I don't have to do the editing of it. I get you though, Kim. Like I've done it before and it's like I love talking to people on podcasts, but the editing's always like so yeah. Anyway, back to the show. So yeah, so because of one bad experience with a woman empress, there was never again another woman empress. And so even though it's not like people use that as an example, but it's a similar phenomenon, right? Like I'm sure if I talk to enough people, excuse me, we'll get stories of like, oh, we had someone who maybe we had a black leader or whoever, and then they didn't show up so well, or they maybe they were never set up for success, and because that happens too, because we've heard of that phenomenon, right? Where companies will hire a female CEO when the company's at a downward trajectory, and then the company fails, and then they go, "It's her fault."
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I
But
think
I
there's like a phrase for it, but I can't think of it right now. Yeah.
but I think that also reminds me of what you and I were talking about before we started recording, which
Yeah.
is the feedback loop that we get as
Yeah.
women.
Yeah.
And again, there is data to prove this. This is not just irrational, opaque thinking,
Yeah.
that women are judged more for how they come across,
Hmm.
or how they make others feel, or how
Yeah.
others feel about them. And men are given feedback based on their performance. I
Yeah.
cannot, because I'm writing a book right now that is very heavy memoir. It's actually, I'm writing the most difficult part of my career, which was right out of grad school. Look, you and
Mm.
I have similar tracks. And I had these thoughts of, this is going to be amazing. Like, this is the dream job.
Mhm.
And there were a series of very damaging incidents with other
Mm.
women at the office. And I'll just give you one where I was really trying to find my place, really trying to make an impact, right? You get out of grad school, you've been studying, you've been conceptually learning, you're ready to do.
Mhm.
And a woman who had been with the center that I was with, she had been with them for 25 years. And she did have my best interests at hand,
Mhm.
but she's walking with me down the hallway, whispering. She's like, Kim, word's getting around that you're unhappy. And I
Oh my
really just
gosh.
don't want people to think that about you. So just, be a little bit more patient. And I thought, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I just came out of 2 master's programs, took this job at an absurdly low rate, am coming in offering to do whatever I can do for any team that needs me. And that's making people uncomfortable. That
Yeah.
work ethic and drive is intimidating people. And that's a me problem. And I'm now putting my job at risk because other people are perceiving me in a certain way. Like, what kind of mental gymnastics is that?
Yeah. I just got really triggered by that story because it just that that one short story is basically how you can sum up my career. You know, um, you're not the only one to have told me this. I'm not the only one with these experiences. I've talked to so many women who said and agree that I have never met more um, backstabbing women than I have in the corporate space. And in some ways, I had to ask myself a couple of times, like, why do I still hold on to this idea of wanting to empower women and elevate women? Because if you look at my last, 12, whatever, how many years in the corporate space, I've had just one disappointing experience after another. Now, it doesn't mean that all my female bosses were bad. I've had a couple good ones, but the majority of them were not great. And many of them had that queen bee syndrome. And some of them just were just simply not really good at the whole leadership thing. Um, and and then but when I stepped out of the corporate space and then I meet women like you, I meet women around me and locally or wherever, it's a very different story. I think inherently women do want to support other women because we are experiencing how hard it is to be us, and we know we're not the only ones. But when you put us in the corporate setting where it's almost like a bubble, it's not the real world. They create this sense of fake scarcity. I say fake because it's not real. If you don't get the job, every life moves on. Trust me. And then you create this competitiveness that turns extremely toxic because what you're doing is you're subtly pitting the women against each other. And then women see how the people around them who are successful behave, and they're usually men, so they adopt a lot of those behaviors. But of course, being women being women who are always put under the microscope, those toxic behaviors get highlighted when they do it. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I'm just curious because I think that, again, the way that you come across, I don't know if this is true in your own head, is very self assured, very
Interesting.
confident, very sure of who she is.
Mm,
Did this feedback ever get to you? Did you ever make it mean something about you? Because I did. And I've been unlearning those stories for the last 20 years.
yeah, I mean, I would say it definitely affected me more in my earlier years, right? When I didn't have the confidence, when I did allow myself to get defined by what other people, said about me. And it was later on, I had this one female boss, and she's probably really, when I think about it, the only good one I ever had, really, or one of the two. And she herself was very much of like a butterfly, an extrovert. And so she would often do things and she would get feedback that she would rub people the wrong way. And you know, really what she did? She just had an idea and she just wanted to push it. That's it. She had an idea. She was excited about it. She didn't bulldoze over people. She didn't silence people. She was just very adamant of like, here's my idea. I'm going to go for it. And she didn't ask for permission. And then she gets feedback that, so she understood. And so she allowed me to step into that space. At the same time, because she was also my boss, she would still try to coach me on things like, by the way, people are saying that you're not very nice at the office. And by that, it's not that you're mean. It's just that you're not coming in to say good morning to people. I was like, oh, okay.
What are you supposed to do with that?
L-
Like,
uh, you know,
I trust that she told you that with the best of intentions, but
yeah,
that's the kind of thing where it's like, okay, well, here is how I perform my
yeah,
best at work. I need to have my time to get my head right. You don't know what I'm walking into coming from my house. You probably don't want to interact with me personally if I haven't had two
yeah,
cups of coffee yet. And so it's
yeah,
like, but that is normal. And I'm sure she thought that it was helpful to give you a heads up, and still,
yeah.
why is this a thing?
I think it became a thing because she got, a little bit of that nudge from leadership too about how she was showing up. In some ways, I think she was telling me how to protect myself
Yeah.
because she was also getting that feedback that, maybe she doesn't seem to care about people. And I'm like, that's a really weird feedback to give to someone who's one of your highest performing leaders. You know what I mean? And she was a good boss. Like she would trust me and she'll be like, "Go do that project. You don't need to check in with me. I just trust that you'll do it." And I was like, this kind of leadership exists. Anyway, I digress. So, but at the moment, she was like, her approach was, it sucks that you have to put on a smiley face just so that people think you're nice. But that's just the game you have to play. The-
I think that's why a lot of us who have these not even bolder characteristics, but find ourselves more willing than some of our peers to speak up or take up space. We end up going out on our own. But I actually don't think that's the solution. And I
Mm,
fear there's so much like talk around like if you're not building your own business, you're failing. And the truth is not everybody is meant to build their own business. Like my
mhm.
husband, no, never. We tried that
Same.
together. It was
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
So I think that we do actually, even those of us outside of the corporate space, have to focus on not just leaving that behind because we left ourselves,
Hmm.
because the majority of people are working in structures where this is a very real thing for them day in, day out.
Yeah.
And it's just not as simple as being like, well, just go work for yourself and make your own, be your own boss and make your own freedom.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like that thing where people say, and I'm going to make it just, 0.5% political. It's like when people talk about what they don't like, what's happening in the country, whatever, and people just say, well, then just leave. It's like, well, no, we can't just be flippant about that, right? And so when women push back in the corporate space, and I used to push back, sometimes I would hear something like that, like, well, maybe you're meant for a job that's not blah, 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 or maybe you should do, it's like, maybe escape isn't the only answer, right?
Yeah.
Like it's okay for us to bring up something in hopes of wanting to change rather than looking at it as us complaining or looking at us as like, well, why don't you just leave already then? So like I think that's also a flippant response to, and it kind of dismisses basically what we're saying, right? By saying, oh, if you don't like it here, then you can leave,
Or you
right?
can't hack it, right?
Yeah.
If it's too much for you.
Grow thicker skin. Right? You grow thick skin. And actually, in some ways like I said, I was saying like I used to resent queen bees a lot. But I think especially now that I'm a little older and I pulled myself out of the system, I can have some empathy for them now because I could only imagine how scary it was to be them in their prime while they were climbing to look around and see nobody supporting them. Everyone's just watching and waiting for the moment she slips and falls. And then finally to get to that spot and then thinking, okay, now that I'm here, I got to do whatever it takes to stay here. And that doesn't put you in a growth mindset. That doesn't put you in a space where you have room for compassion for others because it's all about me, me, me. So I think that's just the detriment of what happens when you isolate people and you tokenize their leadership and you tokenize the way they show up. And we see the effects of that on a generation of other women who are trying to rise and are going, oh my gosh, who are all these women trying to push us back down? Like, what's going on here? Right?
Yeah. I think it's also generational and,
Yeah.
not to
Yeah.
overgeneralize, but I we're both millennials
Yeah.
and it was different for us. I had a conversation with um, a Gen Z woman a few
Mhm.
months back. And she was very much just talking about how she's building this thing on the side because
Mhm.
that's where everything that she cares about is. And she's just going to take a job that pays her well. And that's all that matters. But she has no desire to try to make her work meaningful. She's like, it's literally a paycheck, and I'm okay with that. And I'm
Mhm.
not like, my identity has nothing to do with my day job. And I think
Yeah.
as millennials, we were fed some really different expectations.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I love that you're pointing out I call it like just the courage of the younger women today, because in some ways it's very empowering to just know what you want and be very clear with yourself of what something is. In some ways, it's almost like something happened between our generation and the Gen Zs where they have been able to divorce work from their identity, which I think was maybe part of the phenomenon for us. I remember going to like career workshops, on school, on campus. And, this was at the time when I did 1 year of grad school at NYU, and, NYU being NYU, they just, it being in New York City and all that, just a little more like, I don't want to call it uptight because that's not the right word, but just a little more like very competitive and very serious, right, about that. And this was right around the market crash too. So the message we got was, you must get a job. Like, in fact, if you can't, in fact, you must beg for it. You must put yourself, like, position yourself as like almost like the golden goose for a job that maybe pays you like $60,000 with a master's degree.
Oh, mine
And
was 40. They
what,
offered me 40 with
what
2 master's degrees. I was like,
that's also believable, by the way. But 60 was considered like, whoa, jackpot, kind of, you know what I mean?
in New
Uh,
York, yeah.
yeah. And I just remember just like really internalizing it, and because it's feeding all the things that we were brought up with, or especially I was brought up with, which is that your career path is the one way for you to make it in life, right? And you better, you just better follow that path. And so for me, it was kind of interesting because I grew up like being like, you're told you have to do this, and don't push back, blah blah blah. But in the corporate space, when I try to follow the path, it was like, okay, you're not taking enough initiative, you're not speaking up enough. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, okay, different expectations here. Okay, I got to switch my mindset. That was traumatic to be told that I wasn't performing well because I wasn't speaking up. And I'm thinking, oh, that's different from how I was taught all my life. Okay, so I got to adjust. And then it's, and then after that, you know how it is. It's, no, you gotta voice yourself in a different way. I know you were trying to express yourself, but this is how you should do it. Oh, I know you were trying to do this, but this is how you should do it. And not to say that there is a merit in effective communication skills and being able to influence with your words. Um, but it just felt like everything I did was a mistake. And like you, even when we were performing and we were quote unquote the rock star, they had to still find something to tear you down because it's almost like they couldn't handle
Oh, it's
if,
uncomfortable,
right?
very uncomfortable for them.
Like we can't have a female leader who just performs and we celebrate it. No, we got to find a flaw. Like, I don't like, where's that? Like, what is that about? And is that going to go away, you think?
I mean, real talk,
Real talk.
I had hope, but given where we are today,
Mm-hmm.
I think no, I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say ever, but I think that there is women are under a microscope, like you
Mm-hmm.
said. I think that the faster that companies want to grow and scale at all costs, and anything that does not fit the mold. And by the way, this isn't just women. This is
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
anyone who doesn't buy into the mindset of how you have to look, act, be, show up, how many hours you have to work, when you have to be available. I think that it's easier than ever for people to say, oh, like we're right sizing
Yeah.
and your job is gone. I have a woman that I talked to this morning. She's new to my community. She was so burnout. She was having multiple health issues. She was
Oh.
missing out on all of her kids' childhood for this job where she had to, and when she says 80 hours a week, like literally working 80 hours a week, she ended up having to have neck surgery. So was out for 8 weeks, came back, and they said, you no longer have a position. And so I think in these positions where we used to think, okay, I'm protected, it there's no protection anymore. Like security isn't real. And when you and I were coming up in, starting our businesses or having more of an entrepreneurial mindset, I think a lot of people were still very much bought into like the most secure thing that you can do is work for someone else.
Yeah.
And I think the tides within the last 5 to 10 years, as these massive layoffs have been happening. Now we have AI. It's just honestly, I don't mean to paint a bleak situation because I do think as women, we have more
Sure.
options. And there's more examples of us sharing the messy middle and giving that leg up and amplifying
Mm-hmm.
each other. But I do think that it's just easier than ever to be able to justify why your services are no longer needed. And
Yeah.
so, what do we do with that? I think it's just really being aware of how visible you are, how much you know yourself, how much you believe in your skill set, and being able to realize that no one position is ever going to just be it for you. You've
Exactly.
always got to be able to accept and expect that there's something around the corner.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's even the term dream job, is a fallacy. There's no such thing as a dream job, right? Um, I think, yeah, the idea of career stability or any kind of stability really hasn't been an illusion for the longest time. I mean, there is temporary stability, right? When things are going well, when the market's good and there are no layoffs. And then when things get volatile or something like COVID happens, we saw what that did to a lot of people's jobs. And, but I think so the thing that I want to make sure I don't forget to talk about is also now that we both are out of the corporate world, right? In some ways, we've said goodbye to that, even though we still may have encounters with people who work there. But being in business, it feels very Wild West. And do you think it's better or it's more okay or like to be called a bee in the business world? Because again, very different dynamics here. It's almost Wild West in the sense that there are no rules, there's no standards, there's no like you must do this or that, right? It's very unlike the corporate world. So when you do get called a bee here in this space, I definitely see that there's some women who take that as a like a passive pride, like it must mean that I get shit done, right? And then also, what's interesting is like when you're in the circle of women who are in business, it's also interesting to see how they show up romantically as well as they're looking for a partner and all that. And and from that perspective, a lot of them have said, yeah, it's in some ways, it's like if you want to succeed romantically, getting, and in business, you have to be a bitch. Like, and again, it makes me pause because I think about what does that actually mean? Are we
Mhm.
really trying to re empower ourselves by redefining this word that really was a slur? Or are we is this just what it means to show up in our power and then there's no need to call it anything else other than that, right?
Yeah. Some of the most powerful feedback I ever got from someone when I was going through a shift of my own was, Kim, the exact things that worked against you
Mhm.
in your former roles are going to be exactly what someone comes to you for when you're working for yourself.
Yeah,
And so when you talk about, calling yourself a bee or claiming it, I'm not one for titles anyways.
sure.
I've had them all.
Yeah.
So like, I think they do very little, but distract us from the deeper thing. And I think that if someone is saying, claim that you're a bitch or whatever, what that really means to me is the more that you can go hard into who you really are. And I'm going to
Mm,
try to avoid buzzwords like authenticity and vulnerability and all that,
sure.
because
Yeah.
those are overused.
Yeah.
But the more that you can lean into those pieces that feel true to you, show up in that way, have conversations in that way, do the thing you really want to do, even if you're not sure if it'll land,
Mm,
the more the right people are going to find you. I've had trouble accepting this myself because I still very much believe like, well, I want to be liked. I'll
yeah.
admit it. Like, I want to be liked. I want to be
Yeah.
understood. I want to be accepted. And what that often looks like is fear. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not visible. I'm not saying the thing I want to say because there's one person who might interpret it wrong. I am scared of feedback. All of those things as you're an entrepreneur, you have to work on every single day.
Yeah.
But the more and more that I see it playing out, that like the stranger that I can be, the more like
Mm,
quirky that I am, and the more that I can share that, and the more that I can just lean into that. So for some women, it is bitchiness, or read boldness,
yeah.
speaking your mind, saying the thing that everybody else sees, but nobody is talking about. Those are the things that are going to make people trust you when
Mhm.
you are running a ship of your own, right?
Yeah.
When you are like actually having to market yourself, charge for things, because to be a leader, to stand out, to catch someone's attention in this very busy, noisy world that we live in,
Mhm.
you've got to stand for something. You got to stand out for something. So if you're like muddying everything because you're not sure how you're going to come across,
Mhm.
I guess I could sum it up with like, if you've ever been called a bitch, then that probably is part of your superpower. But I don't think that you have to change who you are to be this bossier, bitchier, bolder person. I have seen some incredible women entrepreneurs
Mhm.
who lead very gently
Yeah.
and softly, but they are intentional with their words. They say no to a lot of things, but it's not in a crass or harsh way. It's just they know who they are, they know what they need, they're not afraid to say it.
Yeah. And to me, that's true feminine power. It doesn't have to look masculine. It doesn't have to look loud. And it's really the key. What I heard you say about those gentle women who lead very firmly is that they have standards and boundaries, and they're willing to hold them,
Yes.
right? And they're not willing to compromise them. But for them, how they communicate that is part of their power. Um, and one last question for you, but I'm going to say something that I think may or may not be controversial, but based on the statistics that we've seen in the literature around how women need to be liked and how women get assessed for their personality and men only get assessed for their performance, I think regardless of whether we're in the entrepreneurial space or in the corporate space, I think that women are still being asked, whether it's required, expected, or whatever, but there is still this expectation that women have to be liked. Um, I personally don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I think you can like women for different reasons. Like there's some women who are extremely firm, very direct. In some ways, it's very jarring, but I still like them as people. I may just not like how they communicate. So I've been trying to be intentional and not be quick to label another woman for being a B just because I may not like how she's displaying certain behavior at any given moment. It's just being mindful of like, what do I not like about this? Is it like, do I have to define her a certain way, or can I just acknowledge that I just don't like how she sees certain things, but I can still respect her as a human being?
Well, that requires a lot of work though on your behalf. And I think we
It
have to
does, yeah.
acknowledge the hard thing for overachievers and people who have very high standards is acknowledging that not everyone is doing the same work that we're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
And there's a really good book that I read called The Likability Trap that talks
Hmm.
exactly about what you're talking about. And um, I just don't think we can just say, don't worry what people think about you,
Yeah.
because I already think that we have an empathy crisis going on. And to just act like it doesn't matter what
Yeah.
anyone thinks isn't really doing anything to build connection. But I think what you just said, so I think that when we think about what can we do about this, the most important thing that we can do is actually the work on ourselves and awareness that you just mentioned, which
Mm.
is being able to very much understand the lens through which you are perceiving other people. And is this
Yeah.
triggering something because it is bringing up an old story that I had, or
Yeah.
it's reminding me of a boss that I had, or is this bringing something up because this person is acting in a way that I wish that I could actually act? And so I know that this is the work, right? Like this is
Hmm.
the inner work. And I don't want to also come across assuming that it's just on us as women.
Yeah.
But I do think that we can control what we can control, and doing that work and very much understanding where someone is coming from in
Yeah.
order to lift other women up, that's going
Hmm.
to be the thing that's going to change things. I don't think that we can count on corporate structures
Yeah.
to change things for us. I don't think that we can even count on like our spouses, partners who may be very supportive to us, but like maybe to other people in the workplace, they're not using their voice because they're not sure how they would come across. So
Yeah.
my point is, everything that you just explained, that thought process of not being quick to respond, not being quick to reflect or deflect or
Mhm.
push down, that's where the real power lies in making these spaces work better for us as women and women who have so much excitement, so much enthusiasm, so much vision. And because of that,
Mhm.
are often called a bitch
Right.
because we just have so much in us that can't be contained.
Yeah. And I love that because really that it's making me think about like how I used to be a sponge for other people's validation or criticism. And what I'm hearing also from what you're saying is you don't have to accept what other people give you,
No.
right?
Wow.
If people like you don't have to take everything as feedback. Some people have their own demons, have their own projections. You don't have to accept it. You can be like, "Oh, that's not a nice thing to hear. It's not a nice thing for you to say, but I don't have to take it in. I don't have to accept it." Um, Tell women how can they work with you? How can they know more about the bench? Yeah, all the things.
Yeah. So about a year ago, I made the decision to stop taking on one clients. And
Okay.
this was a point where I was so burnt out. I thought, okay, I just need a break. We just moved. I got to get my family settled in this new place.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize is that with that space, all my creativity would explode. So
Mm,
I'm working on my first book. It's all about being a multi hyphenate woman
okay.
and how to lead without having to pick a lane. So
Love
that
it.
will be coming out in winter 2026. It's been delayed and delayed, but I got to get it right.
Yeah.
So that'll be coming out shortly. I run a community called The Bench, and it's for high achieving women who love their work, but want it to come at less of a cost. And
Mm,
we have women in there from corporate, we have people job seeking, we have experienced entrepreneurs,
hmm.
we have people who are doing many different things. And we're really coming together over 12 months to
Mm,
have a place where we can talk about what change and transition really looks like. We're
yeah.
asking the hard questions. We're admitting the things we're unsure of. And so that is open for enrollment twice a year in the fall and in the spring. And you can find everything else. I do offer just 1 hour
Mhm.
consulting calls.
Sure.
And those are best for folks who are in the middle of shifts, change, transitions. And whether you want to bring an idea to life, whether you're looking to make a change in your work,
Hmm.
they're great places to just have a sounding board, get some perspective that, I think
Yeah.
often we go to friends or family members and we're disappointed by, or we're like, no, you just don't get it. And so those are really
Hmm.
great containers to just sort of understand what's the next brave step that I can make. So
Yeah.
everything is easy to find. It's at my name, kimwensel.com.
Love it. Ladies, you heard it. If you're a high achieving woman, which I think most women who listen to me are, and you're looking for a space where you can find sisterhood and community with a mixed audience of women, please check out the bench. And you're hearing Kim. Kim is a badass. So I'm sure she would love, to get to know more of you as well. So check her out. And thanks again for listening.